waters, as you know, in a health crisis, also an economic crisis, and I wish we could be with you in person, but hopefully if our numbers continue to trend in a favorable way, we'll be able to get into our phase 3 and then get everybody back to as near normal as lives as possible. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank our staff, obviously led by Secretary Strickler. I'm just so proud of all the work that collectively we've done together, and certainly he's shown great leadership. We also, I think, on the video call today, we have Ann Jennings, and she has just been phenomenal. Joshua Sachs is doing outstanding work. You heard from Miriam a little bit earlier. And then I believe Julia Langen from Historic Resources is with us today, as well as Clyde Christman from Conservation and Recreation. Just a great team we have, and as Matt said, environmental issues are certainly one of our top priorities. And interestingly, I suspect most of our audience today believe in science. You believe in climate change, and it's kind of relevant and pertinent that we're seeing this COVID-19, and we've seen other outbreaks in the past to include Ebola and the Zika virus because of the transmission from animals to humans. And you know, I can't predict the future, but if we don't get our arms wrapped around climate change and stop putting as much carbon into the atmosphere, then we're going to continue to battle with these pandemics. So I just wanted to thank everybody. And as you all know, last April, believe it or not, a little bit over a year ago, we put out Conserve Virginia, which is just, I think, really just a collective effort and really a state-of-the-art way of conserving land in Virginia. And just some, I'm sure they'll go over with you a little bit later, but they identified in the first year 117,085 acres of high-value lands and conservation sites in Virginia. And you know, we use 6 categories, and I just wanted to run through those very quickly just to remind you of those, and we're actually adding a 7th category today as part of this announcement. But those 6 categories were agriculture and forestry, natural habitat and ecosystem diversity, floodplains and flooding resilience, the historic preservations, scenic preservations, and protected landscapes resilience. So what we want to announce today is what we're calling Conserve Virginia 2.0. As with any plan, it's always great to update it, and that's what we want to do today with basically 3 updates. But starting, there'll be increased acreage of an increase of 519,000, almost a million, of acres of land that will be included in this announcement. So the first area that we're, and this is the 7th category, is water quality improvement. And what this is all about is reducing the pollution from non-point resources, the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the sediment that goes into our waterways. This is a collective effort between our DEQ and DCR. So I wanted to thank, and I don't know if David Paler is on the call today, but certainly thank him for his leadership as well. And as you all know, Clyde is in charge of DCR. And this is really important as we continue to invest and really make a lot of effort into cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. And as in a lot of different areas, Virginia tends to be a leader. That's the way we want it. And I think this will really set a good precedent for other states to follow with this. So the second area that we want to talk about is scenic preservation. And you know, tourists love coming to Virginia. Obviously, we all like to be outdoors, and the scenery is very important, whether it be out on trails or along the rivers, whatever. So this past year in the General Assembly, 6 waterways were designated as scenic, and I just wanted to review those very quickly. 5 rivers and 1 creek. The 5 rivers are Pound, Maury, Stanton, James, Clinch, and then Grays Creek. So this is a big step in a positive direction as well to make sure that we preserve the scenic areas of Virginia. And then finally, something that obviously that has been so important to our administration, and it has really come into focus over the past couple of weeks with the police brutality and the protests, and that's the issue of equity. And we are focused on that in Virginia. Janice Underwood, I'm not sure if she's with us today on this call, but she's our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Officer, and she's done great work. And we've really made this a priority, and we will continue to. And as I have said before, there are a lot of inequities. Environment is one of them, but access to education, access to healthcare, to the voting booth, business opportunities, all of these things we've worked on in the past, but we'll continue as we move forward. So we wanted to focus on the cultural and historic preservation. And this is something that I wasn't aware of, but the United States colored troops back in the Civil War, there were about 178,000, believe it or not, individuals that fought during that war. And so there are about 129,000 acres of land in battlegrounds and battlefields in Virginia, and we want to make sure to preserve that history. So that is the third aspect of the upgrade of the Conserve Virginia 2.0. So a lot of exciting things happening. Just a quick comment on our budget, and Secretary Strickler touched on this. When we finished our session in 2020, when the legislators passed the budget, it was one of the most progressive budgets that Virginia has ever seen. A lot of investments in the environment, a lot of investments in education, higher education, pre-K, early childhood education. And we kind of had to hit the pause button because of COVID-19. But I am convinced and confident that we went into COVID-19 in a strong position, and we're going to come out of it in a strong position. And we're now starting to get people back to work. Our economy, I think, is picking up. Our revenues will improve. And so I just wanted to make the point is when we go back, when we have the legislature come back into a special session, probably in early August, we'll know better what our revenues are. But it's important that we continue to fight for the priorities that are important to us, and certainly the environment is one of them. So that's my commitment as we move forward, and I know Secretary Strickler and his staff are committed to that as well. And I just appreciate all of you that are part of this in moving Virginia forward and doing great things regarding our environment. And it's important not only for us, but it's important for our future, for our children and their children. So Matt, it's probably longer than you wanted me to speak this morning or this afternoon, early afternoon, but I do again appreciate your leadership and appreciate everybody being on this video today and continue to move forward for Virginia to continue to do the great work that we've done for our environment. So thank you for the opportunity, and I will turn it back to you, Matt.
Governor, thank you so much for those remarks and to kick off this second phase of the Conserve Virginia effort. Certainly appreciate all the points you made, and would like to take a little bit of time to expand on those. As Secretary of Natural Resources, I'm certainly well aware of the myriad environmental challenges we face in Virginia. Our rivers and streams in the Chesapeake Bay, many of them are impaired. We're losing forests and farmlands. We're seeing species decline and extinction like never before. And solving and mitigating these environmental challenges takes a lot of resources. And that's why, particularly in this uncertain budget climate, we really need to be leveraging multiple benefits, and that's imperative to protecting and restoring Virginia's environment. And, when land conservation dollars can be leveraged to not only protect landscapes, but also reduce water pollution, save rare and endangered species, preserve cultural and historic resources, or provide resilience against rising seas and increasing storm intensity. That's a win for all Virginians, and certainly a fiscally responsible and thoughtful approach. And by doing what we can to leverage those resources, we're making sure that we get the best bang for our conservation dollar. And when we conserve lands through the various state administered programs, our grant programs, we're able to require that particular benefits that are identified in Conserve Virginia are protected and preserved. So for example, a Virginia Land Conservation Foundation grant to protect lands that are identified in the new water quality improvement category will require riparian buffers a minimum of 100 feet around streams. And that's something that we can lock in there, as well as our stateside land and water conservation fund grants that we get that amount of money from the Department of Interior. So trying to ensure that all Virginians benefit from these conservation programs is a real goal we have. And I'd like to expand a little bit more just on the benefits of conservation. There's, many of you all know, very widespread and growing consensus among scientists and conservationists that to prevent basically a mass extinction crisis and support a growing global population and address climate change, we need to conserve at least 30% of the planet, the natural areas on the planet by 2030. And Virginia is committed to doing its part to help get there. The time frame, of course, we're getting a lot of resources from outside the Commonwealth to do anything on that kind of an accelerated scale, and a lot of federal commitment and investment would be necessary. But we're working hard to protect migratory bird species, reduce climate pollution, and we're committed to trying to get to this 30 by 30 goal that's been supported by folks like the National Geographic Society, the Weiss Campaign for Nature, and a growing coalition of more than 100 conservation organizations around the world. So if we're going to get there, though, looking at the targeting through Conserve Virginia and pairing that with our currently protected natural, that would get us to about 33% of the Commonwealth protected. And again, getting there on the 2030 timeframe is not something that we are taking as a policy position as the Commonwealth on our own. We would need a lot of help to get there, but certainly we've identified through Conserve Virginia a roadmap to protect the lands that we think are, and science shows, are the most critical for conservation. So we think these are really important goals for Virginia, for the planet. We think that we've ignored for too long some of these impacts on nature that we're having, and kind of the death by 1,000 cuts that a lot of the activity that we have that has economic benefits is having. We certainly want to be able to consider those. So I'm not going to go on too long, but I would like to thank a few people before I pass this over to the experts here. Our team of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Director Clyde Chrisman, Tom Smith, and then Jason Bullock, who runs the Natural Heritage Program, have been really instrumental in getting this thing off the ground and making it a reality. The Natural Heritage team that Jason leads, including Joe Weber, and David Boyd, have just done a ton of really excellent work that we're excited to show you. So thanks to everyone at DCR. James Martin at DEQ is one of our water quality modeling experts, and has done a ton of work providing our kind of substantial and substantive technical underpinnings for the water quality layer. Again, and her team at DHR working on the USGT battlefield. So again, a big team effort, and a lot has gone into this. And certainly special thanks go to my Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources, Joshua Sachs. He's kind of been the point person for us on this initiative in my office, and has done a ton of work getting everybody on the same page and putting this product together. And it's certainly something to be proud of. So with that, I will turn it over to Josh to give a deeper dive into the Conserve Virginia updates.
Secretary Strickler, if you don't mind, I'm going to interject really quickly. Just before we start the presentation portion and we shoot it over back to Josh, I just want to again thank you, Governor, for joining us. I think you might have to split midway through the presentation, and I know you're very familiar with it. So without further ado, just again want to thank you for your time, your leadership, and turn it back over to Josh. And folks, just again, please be sure to provide any questions or comments in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thank you. And first, goodbye, Governor Northam. Thank you very much. And welcome to everybody else. As Matt said, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources, and have the responsibility for a lot of our land conservation work here, which includes Conserve Virginia. So I'm going to now pivot us back to a little bit more of a traditional webinar type style. I'm going to pop up a presentation here, and I'm going to walk you through Conserve Virginia and what it is. I'm going to take about 10 minutes here, and I'm going to explain to you what it is, why it's working, and then some detail on the new layers we're adding. So I know we have a lot of people on the webinar, different levels of familiarity. So bear with me as I walk you through. So let me start by just telling you, I think you've heard from both the secretary and the governor some things about Conserve Virginia. Governor Northam made it very clear that a key element of Conserve Virginia is a map, a smart map, if you will, where we synthesize a bunch of models and figure out the highest priorities land to conserve. I think often people think Conserve Virginia just means that model. But to me, and I think to us, Conserve Virginia means much, much more. First, it means a shift in approach to conservation, where for years and years and years, the approach was acreage based or famous place based. We had little way to know what conservation values we could conserve to that would really benefit all Virginians or all people. So Conserve Virginia is a way where we can use data to understand what makes our land special and conserve to it. Conserve Virginia is also a commitment to conserve to those values and to making sure that we set requirements. So it's not enough simply to identify an area as a place we want to conserve, but we add conditions and we make sure that for it to count against Conserve Virginia, we're employing tactics that will conserve to that. So to me, Conserve Virginia is all those things, and it's also accountability. It's making sure that after we've conserved something, it's doing what we want and keeping measurable data. So I wanted to start there and just sort of share with you that Conserve Virginia can sort of be a noun and a verb and sort of all sorts of things. So let's get into it. What is Conserve Virginia? At its heart, as the governor said, it is a map that shows us high priority areas. And we started this project by reaching out to all of these various data providers you see before you, as well as consulting with about 25 land trusts in the Commonwealth to determine what layers, what data sets existed, what categories we wanted. And using that, we were able to put together Conserve Virginia. And what you'll see on the right are the 6 categories Governor Northam already explained to you or read off to you. I think most of them sort of make sense. Protected landscapes resilience, one people sometimes question, means those are areas to buffer our conserved lands, state parks, national parks, things like that. Our floodplains and flooding resilience layer is focused on protecting areas of historic riverine flooding and coastal wetlands and wetland migration zones. So these are the categories across which we've taken these 21 data sets. And now we're going to be adding a 7th, the water quality improvement category, which we'll talk about later. But all told, I think this is a representation of what are the key values that we in the Northam administration believe we can conserve for and we should conserve for the benefit of all Virginians. Sorry, okay. So now the moment we've all been waiting for, everyone wants to see what it looks like. And I'm actually going to start here with a picture of Conserve Virginia 1.0. And then everybody watch closely. I'm going to click a button and it's going to fill in and turn into Conserve Virginia 2.0. Places you're going to see particular change are going to be the Shenandoah Valley, the Upper Piedmont, to the west of the Great Dismal Swamp, the Northern Neck, the Eastern Shore, and it's going to move up from the bottom to the top. So here we go. And that's the difference. I'm going to do that one more time. So you can see we've substantially grown Conserve Virginia by about 500,000 acres. I want to make the point that we have also taken acres out of Conserve Virginia. One thing I mentioned before is that accountability and making sure we're conserving to the right values are key parts of Conserve Virginia. So since the program has begun, every time land is conserved in the Commonwealth of Virginia, be it by easement or an acquisition by the state or some other way, we review those documents, the easement documents, the park plan, etc. There's a staff of 3 at DCR who does this. And we actually read deed language to make sure that it's satisfying the requirement for the layer people sought to conserve. If it does not meet our requirements, we don't credit it on the map and we don't take it off the map. If it does meet our requirements, we take it off the map. So, one, this map has changed because we've adjusted for all the lands we've conserved over the last year. I'm proud to say more than half of those lands have been Conserve Virginia lands and conserved to the values we wanted. That's excellent. We hope to raise that. That's sort of what it looks like and how it's working. Now, next, I think I'd like to show you a very short video. This is going to be a 3-minute video, so bear with me here, because I want you to see what Conserve Virginia is and how it works. And it's a moving model. It's very hard for me to show it to you in static slides. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to show you a quick 3-minute video narrated by DCR's Joe Weber on how Conserve Virginia works. Here we go.
This is a brief demonstration for how to use Conserve Virginia in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. The address is vanhde.org. It is not necessary to log into the site for public use. Users can go directly to the Map tab and click it. And when the page loads, accept the terms of use. On the left side of the page, in the table of contents, users will see the Conserve Virginia layers. In order for any of these layers to display, the box next to Conserve Virginia at the top must be checked. While we're waiting for that to display, I'll point out some additional layers in the table of contents. Users can display already protected lands from the Conservation Lands database. They can also compare projects to conservation planning layers to see what other conservation values may be represented. Now that the Conserve Virginia map has displayed in green, I'll zoom into an area of interest. Let's say there is a project that intersects this polygon of Conserve Virginia. The user would take the Identify tool and click on where the project intersects Conserve Virginia. This generates a pop-up with details that lists the categories of Conserve Virginia and indicates with a yes or a no whether or not a particular category contributed to this polygon being in Conserve Virginia. So in this case, the agriculture and forestry and the floodplains and flooding resilience categories contributed to this area being in Conserve Virginia. The user can then turn on each of those categories and click with the Identify tool in the same exact place. And now the details window lists the inputs to that category and indicates with a yes or no whether or not the input contributed to a polygon being in Conserve Virginia. So in this case, it was the forestry input. That's the reason that this polygon is in Conserve Virginia. And then each one of these pop-ups for categories will include tailored deed language that would be required for a project to count as a success for Conserve Virginia under the specific category. So the other category that was intersected was floodplains and flooding resilience. If we click in the same place, we see the inputs to that category listed, and there's only a yes next to the Virginia Wetlands Catalog, which is the input that caused this polygon to be in Conserve Virginia for this category. And the deed language for this category is going to be different, and it's also going to be required for a project to count as a success under this category for Conserve Virginia. If you need additional help, you can click on the Help tab at the top, where you can download the Natural Heritage Data Explorer User Guide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope that was helpful for those of you who haven't seen it before, and I hope you'll spend some time with NHDE later to see all the things it can do. It's really pretty great. I want to make a few quick additional points now that you've seen what Joe was just showing you with regard to how each parcel is labeled for its value and their specific deed language tied to it. Again, I want to keep reinforcing the theme that the central goal of Conserve Virginia is to values, to conserve for benefits that will benefit as many people as possible in the Commonwealth. So that's why, to get credit for any of our various programs that are grant funded, the VLCF grants, stateside LWCF grants, trails grants, battlefield grants, etc., we want to see a nexus to Conserve Virginia. There will be points and things, and those points will only be rewarded if the project is protecting those values. I want to make one other point about this is Conserve Virginia now lets us see things that the naked eye might not have been able to see. By looking at the map, we can better understand where the Commonwealth's wildlife corridors are, where our marsh areas for resilience are most important, or where there are significant recreational areas or other things like that. And what that does for those of you in the land conservation community, those of you who go out and conserve land, it's an easy checklist to know how to get the most out of the land you're conserving. And I think anyone who does especially easement work, land trusts, etc., knows that it's rather difficult to get a second bite at the apple. Once a parcel, a property is eased, to expand the easement, to add second easements or other requirements is really difficult. So this tool is also a way for us to urge all of you to get everything you can out of conservation projects and to be able to know what to be asking for from those conservation projects. So now that I've said all that and we've talked a lot in the abstract and seen some maps, I want to quickly share with you what this actually translates to. What does Conserve Virginia look like when we put it into practice? And I'm going to share with you some conserve success stories very quickly. We conserved the Newmarket Heights battlefield using battlefield preservation grant money, and it protected the landscape's resilience layer and the natural habitat and ecosystem layer. This is also a battlefield that had significant contributions from USCT troops, and we'll talk about that more later. We were able to use VLCF funds to conserve a wonderful property called Chickahominy on the Powhatan that we were able to donate to the Chickahominy tribe, and that is going to preserve floodplains and flooding resilience and give us scenic preservation values. When it comes to forestry, we were able to purchase some new state forests. 573 acres in Rockingham is First Mountain State Forest, and then the Clinch Highlands, 22,000 acres in Southwest Virginia. And those are going to protect natural habitat and ecosystem diversity and agriculture and forestry. A project like this that is lighting up so many layers, that is conserving for so many things, that is what we're going for. That's the peak. That's the way with limited funds we can do the most for the people of Virginia and for the environment. And then last, the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries recently opened some new wildlife management areas. A wonderful area called Mattaponi Bluffs WMA in Caroline County was opened sort of right around the time of the launch of Conserve Virginia, but we had already been working on it and using it internally. It's also a good time for me to mention that Conserve Virginia not only guides all the grant programs I've mentioned, but guides our state acquisitions. And even in the Department of General Services acquisitions manual, there are references to consulting Conserve Virginia. So now that we've done that, I'd like to take a few final minutes and talk to you about the various layers we have added to Conserve Virginia. And that starts with the historic justice layer. As Governor Northam mentioned, we've added 128,964 acres of area where the U.S. Colored Troop Brigades fought in the Civil War. Side note here, the pictures you see are all from the Battle of New Market Heights, and the soldiers you see in the actual photograph are survivors of that battle. By 1865, a tenth of the Union troops were U.S. colored troops. They suffered a significantly higher casualty rate because they were often sort of put up front. They were some of the first troops to enter Richmond when it fell in 1865. They were some of the first troops to be at Appomattox. And the governor said, you know, historically, the way battlefields was weighted was on their their strategic significance to the war. Well, as we lean into historic justice, we've realized there are other things to value. And part of the beauty of Conserve Virginia is it lets us turn the dials. It lets us choose what we value. And when we realize a dial needs to be turned up or down, we're able to do that. So that's why we're really proud to add this layer. And as an addition, I'm glad to tell you that we've been waiting for this layer to be finalized. And later on today, the Department of Historic Resources will announce a grant round for $1 million for the Virginia Battlefield Preservation Grants. And those grants will be ranked according to the new Conserve Virginia and will give extra credit to these battlefields. Next, I'd like to talk about rivers very quickly. As Governor Northam said, we added several scenic rivers to our list. Virginians told us, Land Trust told us that scenic really matters. And when we started talking to professionals who work in the scenic realm, we realized there's a lot of emphasis on what they term the immediate foreground. So what we chose to do is not decide by ourselves what is scenic. I think in the view of Governor Northam, Secretary Strickler, and I, we think all of Virginia is quite beautiful and scenic. So instead, we decided to rely on formal designations, Great American Roads, scenic byways, scenic rivers, etc. And that has been a way for communities and the General Assembly to actually impact Conserve Virginia and make sure that they're included. So we were very lucky that the General Assembly added 6 river designations, as the governor said, and we have added all of them to Conserve Virginia, sort of highlighting each of those stream sections and buffering 100 feet on either side. So we have the Pound River, which ultimately flows through Breaks River State Park. We have the Clinch, which is one of the most biodiverse rivers in the Northern Hemisphere. And this segment of the Clinch will connect what will soon be Clinch River State Park. The Maury River is among the first rivers to be considered for this program in 1970. The Stanton River, also one of our first designated rivers, and this segment will connect us into Stanton River State Park. The James River extension is going to capture the Middle James, obviously the largest watershed in the state and the river that I live nearest to. And finally, Gray's Creek, one of our few coastal rivers, will be added. So those are all going to be added. And now, without further ado, sort of the big enchilada, if you will, the really significant change to Conserve Virginia is we've added a water quality improvement layer. We knew from day one that one of our biggest deficiencies was that we hadn't accounted for water quality properly because we didn't know how. We've spent the year working on it, and today I'm proud to present to you what we've done. So first, on the right, you will see a picture of what our water quality layer looks like. I want to make the point that this is a linear layer. It's a buffer layer that buffers streams. So that's why you see in the breakout box that when you zoom in, it'll look like squiggles more than it'll look like geometric shapes. As you can see in the box above that, the total acreage for this layer is 790,112 acres. there's an asterisk that says 28,000 of those acres already have some kind of protection. But as I was explaining before, we don't deem it to be appropriate protection to ensure water quality, so it's still included in Conserve Virginia. Here's how we put it together. We started by looking at two models, the Chesapeake Bay Program watershed model, which gave us a sense of the loadings for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment from non-point in the Bay watershed. And because we do all of our modeling statewide, we supplemented the rest of the state with the Virginia Water Quality Assessment, our statewide non-point analysis. And any watershed that's scored in the 90th percentile for pollution on either of those two models automatically was added in, and we buffered all the streams in that watershed. We also wanted to make sure that we were giving priority to the areas that had been identified by the Chesapeake Bay WIP as key priority areas. So what we did there is we looked for areas where the numeric goal of the Chesapeake Bay WIP had a significant delta from the current water quality. And wherever that delta was in the 90th percentile or greater, we also added those areas. So those are the three inputs we used to make sure that we are conserving agricultural lands that will reduce NPNS loadings to our waterways and ultimately help clean up the bay. Now, I mentioned watersheds, and I want to be very clear that what I'm talking about are 12 HUC watersheds. A HUC is a hydrologic unit code, and essentially what it means is different code numbers represent different sizes. A 12 HUC is about as fine as we can get with the water quality monitoring we have, with the modeling analysis we have, with the products that exist in the Bay model. So we're very proud to be able to bring this model down to the 12 HUC. I already mentioned the 90th percentile of loadings. Here's the last piece. We need different size buffers depending on two things: the slope of the bank and whether or not the stream is a first, second order, or third order stream. The further away the stream is from the output, the further away it is from the bay, a first order stream, if you will, is going to contribute more pollution than a third order stream. A very steep bank is going to contribute more pollution than a shallow bank. So our buffers are calculated to be between 100 and 400 foot, depending on those criteria. And finally, the deed requirements we had shown you on various things. This is what we're going to ask for when people conserve these lands now. We're going to say these areas are areas that should be buffered so that we're going to get the most benefit to water quality. And we're going to ask for vegetated buffers, not mowed buffers, vegetated buffers, not necessarily natural vegetation, but a vegetated buffer is what science tells us is the best to ensuring that we can make significant impact to the Chesapeake Bay. So I've said a lot about this, but I am by no means the expert on cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay or water quality. That is actually my colleague and person I share an office wall with, Deputy Secretary Ann Jennings. So I'd like to ask her to jump on for a moment. I'm going to put her picture up, and I'd like to ask her to elaborate and talk a little bit about the water quality layers and what it means for Virginia going forward. Ann?
Fantastic. Thanks, Josh. And thanks to all of you for joining today in this briefing on Conserve Virginia 2.0. I do want to take a moment to talk about the quote, big enchilada. That is the addition of the water quality improvement layer to Conserve Virginia. This is certainly an opportune time to talk about what Virginia is doing to leverage programs to improve the Chesapeake Bay, as it is Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week. As many of you know, the Clean Water Act and the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement commits the watershed states and the District of Columbia to meeting a number of goals. For water quality, Governor Northam has made it clear that Virginia is going to live up to its Clean Water Act commitment to achieve the nutrient and sediment reduction targets for the bay, as well as tackle that increased runoff expected from climate change. So that's our water quality goal. With regard to land conservation, under the watershed agreement, Virginia and its bay partners committed to protecting an additional 2 million acres of lands throughout the bay watershed. Those are lands that are currently identified as having a high conservation priority. So that's our land conservation goal. So Conserve Virginia serves as our primary tool for identifying those high conservation priorities for meeting that land conservation goal. And by adding this 7th layer, this water quality improvement layer within Conserve Virginia, we're able to specifically identify those lands that, if they're conserved, would also advance Virginia's bay pollution reduction goals as well. So through this rigorous data-driven analysis that's used to develop the water quality improvement layer, we're now able to merge our work on both land conservation and clean water initiatives. No other state has such a sophisticated tool that can tether land conservation and pollution reduction results. It's really important. This ensures that our actions and our decisions use limited public resources prudently by achieving multiple benefits or co-benefits. You heard the speaker, the secretary speak to this a little earlier. And Governor Northam called for emphasizing multiple benefits or co-benefits as a core feature of Virginia's Phase 3 watershed implementation plan for the Chesapeake Bay. That was the charge that the governor gave to us. And that's going to be ultimately going to be critical to achieving our success by 2025, is addressing those or taking opportunities to address multiple benefits. So now the water quality improvement layer will help us target additional funding sources to meet our bay restoration goals. And also, by focusing on multiple conservation outcomes, Conserve Virginia addresses those multiple outcomes rather than a single acreage target. And that's led to other developments as well. As you heard Josh mention, the Virginia Land Conservation Board has adopted grant criteria that, of course, include Conserve Virginia, but also require riparian buffers on all conserved properties, regardless of their primary conservation value. They also decided to provide higher scoring opportunities for farm properties that have nutrient management plans, as well as stream fencing to keep cattle from damaging our waterways. Again, looking to drive those multiple or co-benefits, that smart and wise use of the public's resources. So the bottom line is, now with this 7th layer, the big enchilada, the water quality improvement layer, will bring more agricultural lands into the Conserve Virginia model. Will ensure that these grants protect this category. Protecting this category will require buffers and will drive Virginia forward in advancing its goals for the Chesapeake Bay. It's really collaborative work across multiple agencies and secretariats like this that's really going to help ensure that we have a healthy and productive bay for future generations, and cement Virginia's role as a leader and an innovator in that effort. And I thank you all again for joining today. I want to thank Josh, my friend, for leading this effort for us. And Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. There we go. Thank you very much, Ann Jennings. So I just want to wrap up here. As you can see on the slide, that is the web address for Virginia's Natural Heritage Data Explorer, where Conserve Virginia will go live at the end of this webinar. So check it out in about 20 minutes. I want to also let everybody know that we've talked some about methodologies, about some of the layers. I know there may be questions, more in-depth questions, and we'll answer a few of those, but on DCR's and on the Secretary of Natural Resources web pages about Conserve Virginia, there is a methodologies document that is about 15 pages long that can walk you through the nitty-gritty should you choose to wonk out. And last, I just want to also echo the thanks that Secretary Strickler and Governor Northam made to all the staff at DEQ, at DHR, and also to thank Governor Northam and Secretary Strickler for empowering what I think is a really impactful and unique. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Miriam Karad. I believe we have about 10 minutes. The Secretary, others, we're happy to take some questions. Miriam?
Thank you all. Great questions in the chat. Thank you for providing. Again, just note that I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. So first question, and Josh will help me address whoever needs to be the person to answer the question. The first question we have is from Justin Doyle of the James River Association, and his question is, what are some state level policies we can pursue to promote equitable access to parks and green spaces?
Well, I have some thoughts, but I'd like to turn to Secretary Strickler first, I think, on that.
Thanks, Josh. One thing that doesn't really come out in the ConserveVirginia layers, but is certainly central to the work that we're doing is looking at public access and particularly public access for disadvantaged and minority communities and folks that don't traditionally have as much access to the outdoors as potentially others. And the way that we're building that into ConserveVirginia at this time is using the Virginia Conservation Vision Recreation Model, which shows us kind of the areas that are, kind of have a dearth of public access. And this is a really sound model that we're kind of continuing to refine in parallel with ConserveVirginia. But that's our access piece, and then of course through our scoring criteria for the programs that we can control, and we do have the ability to develop guidelines for land conservation in Virginia. We're certainly looking at public access as a major component of the scoring criteria for those programs. So I don't know, Josh, or if Jason Bullock from DCR wants to elaborate on the access piece a little bit or not, but that's what I have.
Thanks, Secretary Strickler.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Miriam.
I actually have a question that is somewhat connected that I think would be helpful to add to that. And this is from Jay Ford of the CBF. As a member of VLCF, of the VLCF board, I want to applaud the administration for your hard work in continuing to advance ConserveVirginia as a model, ensuring that the limited dollars available for land acquisition help meet all of the natural resources objectives, critical. That being said, the majority of dollars for land conservation come in the form of land preservation tax credit. To my knowledge, there is no way for the state to ensure these dollars match ConserveVirginia objectives, particularly equity, access, and historic justice objectives. In fact, the very nature of the program would lead to wealthy Virginians being the primary recipients of the credits. And then have there been any conversations about how the Commonwealth can begin to bring these two programs more in line with one another?
Mr. Secretary.
Well, thanks, Jay, for that question. I think first I'd really like to see if any of our experts want to address the initial question about access, and then perhaps I and others on the call could talk a little bit about the other question.
This is Jason Bullock. I'll add what Matt said. His answer to that was accurate. Right now, well, as many of you may know, we have the Conservation Vision Recreation Model currently on NH, and it's currently being used when we look, say, for example, through the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation scoring process and criteria. We're always using that recreation model. And as it stands now, it identifies gaps in recreation opportunities, be they trailheads or water access. And those gaps are primarily geographic. And right now, and based on travel distance, so that we can focus on those areas that are, as Matt said, relatively lacking for recreational access opportunities. What we're doing now is trying to refine those gaps to elevate them, their priority, when we know that they are near high population centers, and also areas where there's just unequal distribution of opportunities to the people in those areas. So as that's getting updated, you'll also hear about that, and that updated model will be paired with any protection projects that we're also looking at in terms of Conserve Virginia.
Great, thanks, Jason. Appreciate that clarification. On Jay Ford's question on the land preservation tax credit, anytime I talk about this topic, I want to make sure that people realize that the land preservation tax credit is an incredibly valuable program for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I support it. The governor supports it. It is responsible for the vast majority of open space preservation in the Commonwealth. And at the time that it was enacted, I think it was a great victory and continues to be a great program. And I think as constituted, it was a big win and kind of what we could get and what was possible at the time. I think now other things are possible. And this is a massive tax expenditure program. It's capped at $75 million a year. It's incredibly generous, but except for the highest value credits of $1 million or more, there's no accountability, at least at a state government review level, for how these tax dollars are being spent, until the General Assembly requires that. By contrast, as you've heard on this call, we've incorporated the Conserve Virginia model into our state land acquisition projects, into grant criteria for the Virginia Land Foundation grants, and our statewide land and water conservation fund program. So, I think there's a question there about whether or not we, want to do more than we're doing. And I think the one flaw of the tax expenditures in this program, for example, is, the majority of the tax credits go to people who are wealthy enough to own land, and who also happen to be overwhelmingly white. And don't have to offer any public access to the land that the taxpayers are helping them hold onto. So if you value open space preservation, which we do, then the LPTC is in fine shape. But if you, like Governor Northam, value protecting the environment through targeted strategic land conservation, increasing outdoor recreation access, and advancing equity for minority and underserved communities, then I think it's clear that the tax credit program needs some reform. So I think it's unfortunate that we've had a number of stakeholders who may or may not seem to share those values fight our attempts to make the program more accountable. In my mind, I think that's a myopic strategy that makes the program more vulnerable in the long run. But we'll continue to work on it, and we'll see how all that materializes. But thanks for the question. And again, I think we would like to be able to build in some of the very thoughtful science-based analysis that goes into Conserve Virginia into the land preservation tax credits.
Thank you to our ELCF board member. I do want to just note that we are at 1 o'clock. I do believe I have one more question, maybe enough for two if you want to stay with us. Well, we have the webinar for a couple more minutes, but I understand that folks will have to drop off, but there's a lot of questions around our new layer, so I want to address that. I'll just go to the next one. And the question is, can you please address the discrepancy between required deed language, example 35-foot buffers, versus the Department of Forestry's BMPs, which include setting up streamside management zones at least 50% in width, but allow for some harvest within 50 feet. BMPs are audited and have been proven to protect water quality. Is there any way to align forestry BMPs with required deed language as far as buffers are concerned?
Jason or Tom might be able to comment on that, please. Are you muted by chance, Jason or Tom?
This is Tom Smith. Hey, thanks, Josh. The buffers for forestry, the standard has been 35 foot in Conserve Virginia. And I guess I'll just say this is the first time this comment has really come up. So we are always supportive of wider buffers whenever that's possible. And I'll just say we will definitely have a conversation with the Department of Forestry about that standard and take a look at it. So thanks for bringing that up to us.
And again, a lot of any questions that you have provided us, we'll answer on our website as well and via email. Last question from the public. So just a couple questions. I'm going to try to get one that is having to do with a little bit more water quality. So we've got James Christian from Loudoun County. Flood resilience question. Current FEMA regulations inhibit our ability to implement conservation programs in Loudoun County. How will Conserve Virginia integrate the federal regulations to allow Virginia to proceed successfully in this plan?
So I am familiar with some of the Loudoun County issues as I work a lot with DCR's dam and floodplain safety team. I don't know that Conserve Virginia would necessarily be a tool to deal with those issues being that FEMA is reticent to allow anything in the buffer, even the planting of vegetation. So while it's certainly an issue that we think needs to be tackled and we're going to work on, I'm not sure Conserve Virginia will become our vehicle for doing so. Thanks.
One more question, or if you're down for one more question, we can close out with that with one more. And I think it kind of goes with this. I would like clarification as to why native vegetation is not required for buffers. Highest habitat values associated with native vegetation. Non-native vegetation along waterways can be transported via waterways, and the vegetation or vegetative buffers become areas for non-native invasions and displacement of plants.
Well, let me say, I agree with you, and I think the Secretary and the Governor probably would agree with you too, that if we could have native plants in all of our buffers and across the Commonwealth, that would be ideal. But as you know, we have incredible invasive problems. In some places, it's even hard to procure native plants. And while that's something we'd like to continue to work on, it just didn't feel like a tenable requirement at this moment, because not only would it require the planting of natives, but it would require extensive eradication of invasives. So while we'll continue to think on ways we can do better on that, that's why we haven't addressed it thus far.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Deputy. So with that, I want to just remind everyone that please do email us your questions after the presentation. Great questions, and we will provide a little bit more guidance as far as where they will be, whether it's our website or responses. Just one last housekeeping item. There will be a press release and information provided after the webinar, and as Josh mentioned, it will be available at, oh, I guess it's already 1:05, so it will be live shortly. And with that, I'll kind of turn it back over to you.
It's live, Miriam. Go look at it.
Will do.
Okay. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone, and I'll turn it back over to Josh to close.
Well, just thank you all so much for joining us and hearing about this exciting initiative, and thank you for continuing to partner with us in land conservation and helping us to conserve more and more of Conserve Virginia. We really appreciate your time. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.